we have 20 minutes left. I saw Philip, who represents the agriculture sector, nodding when Roger was talking about liberalizing the farm or the rice sector. Could you tell us where that falls in a list of very important things, or the most important things that need to be done in the agri sector to generate jobs?
It's high on the list because basically liberalizing that very protected sector clearly is quite a controversial and difficult area to tackle. But more broadly, I suppose, there's the issue of basically diversifying our crops into high-value crops, right? Because that's, more broadly speaking, when you look at the situation with the integration of the ASEAN Economic Community and the regional free trade agreements, basically, some of our traditional crops certainly are at risk at the moment, right? And the opportunities for us basically are actually to be able to export higher value crops. Okay.
I've been hearing about high value crops just as long as all these other reforms we've been talking about. How do we do that? Is coalition building or using coalitions a key to doing that, or is that mainly a government job?
Coalition building helps, but I guess it starts with government. No, one of the positive areas of the positive achievements of government, I think, over the last few years, basically, has been around the avoidance of subsidies. I mean, if you think about it, basically, it is not uncommon for governments to focus on subsidies for sensitive sectors. And these are usually traditional crops. But the government has avoided this. What they've done is basically they've put more resources into areas that essentially have the ability to produce quality public goods and also improve productivity enhancements, right? Irrigation, farm-to-market roads, market access, R&D, for example, and extension services. Obviously, there's still much to be done. But if you can apply, this approach essentially to higher value crops, basically, then actually you can achieve even greater results, basically, for farmers.
Were you saying that we should be open to subsidies, or that it's correct to be
in fact,
avoiding them?
Avoiding subsidies was exactly the right thing to do. And that's one of the positive areas that the government did avoid having to look at subsidies, basically, in the last few years.
Okay. Bobby represents the manufacturing sector, and I saw you nodding when Roger was talking about the data.gov.ph and how that came about. Could you tell us, in your sector, in the manufacturing sector, what's really needed, especially maybe in the next 856 days or so, to create, not the 12 million jobs that we're lacking, right, but more jobs than we've been creating the last few years?
Okay. Thanks, Coco. Labor reform, Roger talked about it, and we're seeing fruits of that with the work of DOLE, Secretary Baldos, as she engages the private sector, not just this year, but the past few years, but it's gaining ground. But let me point out something. There's 11 million workers in the rural sector. Manufacturing only has 3 million. So there's a lot of opportunity to shift rural labor to higher productivity jobs in manufacturing. The question is there work in manufacturing? So let me share some data on the past year. Manufacturing grew by 10.5% in 2013. It peaked, that's double the growth of 2012, which was only 5.4%. And it peaked at 12.4% in Q4 of last year. So there's certainly a good trend. Now, at this rate, in Q4, manufacturing is already 24% of GDP, compared to what Dr. Roger mentioned about 21% a couple of years ago. Now, is 24% good or bad? The global average for manufacturing is about 13% of GDP. So it's certainly above average. But the last thing I want to add here is that actually, that kind of performance is top quartile for any country in the world. At 24%, we have to realize and remember that the Philippine manufacturing sector is the 24th largest manufacturing sector in the world, over 200 countries. In fact, the darling of the manufacturing world is Vietnam. And a lot of people don't realize that the size of our manufacturing sector is 2 times the size of Vietnam's. Okay? So there's a lot of encouraging numbers on manufacturing. And if labor reform is implemented and progress, I think we will have jobs for these workers.
What has been the most important labor reform, and what remains to be the most important labor reform in the next 2 years?
I think last year, the most encouraging thing was where we're starting to link productivity to minimum wage. Okay? Dole has spearheaded that. It will take time to be implemented in a lot, but we want to see a lot of that. But one of the recommendations in the manufacturing policy brief is to leverage our success in PEZA to domestic zones.
Okay, in the tourism sector, when Secretary Jimenez was here last year, he was talking about, and he still continues to talk about 10 million tourists by 2016. We've actually fallen short of our target despite 9 or 10% growth, fallen short of our target the last 2 years. Is that target achievable? And how do we translate whatever tourists we get, whether it's 3 or 4 million a year, into more jobs, Eileen?
Thank you, Coco. Well, what we really need to count is tourism receipts more than the tourist arrivals. We are an archipelago unlike the rest of the ASEAN. So they can count tourist arrivals, but these are just crossing borders. We are 90% reachable by air, aviation. If it's reachable, I'm positive that we can reach it. But again, tourism is an ecosystem. What we need to do is have a pipeline that's running without any bottlenecks. And where are our bottlenecks? There are 3 actually: systemic, policy, and implementation. Systemic meaning our tourism is exposed to various government departments. And none of these departments are interfaced even in terms of data. So how can we monitor? What is our baseline really? Or does it come 3 months later? That's just one of the examples. For policy, we were successful last year already in the onerous taxation of the airlines. But now we still face the excise tax imposed on the airlines when in fact there's reciprocity. So how do we get the long-haul carriers to come in? Do we want them to go to Singapore, Malaysia, or any other ASEAN country first before coming here? That's already a barrier to entry because it's not convenient. Implementation, one example is, of course, the economic zone. The law has been passed in 2009, and yet we still don't have the infrastructure necessary to sustain the growth of the tourism industry. So these are the 3 things that are necessary to ensure that we have the jobs that can be created for this. 1 tourist is equivalent to 1 direct job and 1.5 indirect job. So it's really an ecosystem, it's an economic multiplier. And here we are faced with the ASEAN integration already. And of course, they've done all their homework. They're already in contiguous land, so it's quite easy to reach there. So that's our challenge.
You talked about how it's more important, or at least as important, to talk about tourism receipts rather than arrivals. How do we get tourism receipts, I guess, on a per-tourist basis up? How do we attract the kind of tourists who will spend more in this country?
Those who spend more and have lesser footprint, by the way, are of course coming from the long haul, the European market, Australia, US, and so on, because they will stay here for 15 days. The short haul market, though as equally important, stays here for 3 to 4 days. So you would expect that there's a double return when you get the long haul markets coming here.
And how are we doing, or what are we doing to encourage that kind of tourism? Are we doing enough of it?
We've done our promotion. Now it's no longer, there's no way to window dress policy. So we really need policies that would make airlines come here. No onerous taxation, encourage them to come here with, again, with the ASEAN integration, there's one of the pillars is the free flow of tourists. So there's going to be a lane that should encourage, if you clear in one country, you're already automatically can be entered in the next country. So are we going to capitalize on that? So these are just some of the strategies that we can implement.
Could I ask all of the three reactors, how important is education in terms of creating jobs or having the right people, or the rightly educated people with the right skills for the jobs that we'll be creating? Maybe we can start with the agri-sector.
Okay. Well, clearly, the agri-sector, or the farmers, basically will benefit from being given the proper guidance and proper training in good agricultural practices. Okay. You know, I think one of the realities, in fact, in the ag sector is the fact that many farmers actually don't make the shift out of ag into, say, manufacturing, into other areas of the economy. They actually stay there, basically. I think it's over 90%, if I recall. Yeah. So it's incumbent on government to be able to educate farmers in better farm practices, because at the end of the day, they really need to be producing better goods of sufficient quantity, and in fact, this is most true, quite frankly, in the Typhoon Yolanda affected areas. It's a very important area that I think the government needs to focus on immediately. I mean, the agricultural sector was badly hit by Typhoon Yolanda, specifically around coconuts. And the question one must ask themselves is, if you were given a clean slate, what would you do? Right? There is, in fact, the reality that because the damage was so extensive that you have to wipe the slate clean in certain areas, and therefore there is the opportunity to do something different, to take a new approach. And I think the farmers need to be taught how to do that.
Bobby?
And to that point, I think tragedy like Yolanda, we can capitalize on that. Let's shift some of those rural workers to manufacturing jobs. And you ask about education. I'd like to answer it two ways. One is for high school, one is for college. Let's remember, manufacturing can take people with college graduates as long as they're 18. That's why K-12 is really perfect. But it's not enough.
You mean high school graduate?
Yes, the high school graduate. That's why it's perfect. They're ready at 18. But we need more internship. A lot of people are advocating it so that we ensure that they have the right skills to perform well in manufacturing. On the college area, we need to encourage more science and engineering. Make no mistake, we have a lot of them, right? But when we're getting up to the point that we almost have more business and marketing graduates than engineers, then I get worried. Let's push more engineering education.
Eileen?
Yes, education is very important. But having said that, tourism caters to the whole spectrum, for the least educated to the one who needs professional testing. And what we need to have in the tourism sector is to ensure that not only the technical skills, but the soft skills, although it's inherent in us to be always, to have the good manners and right conduct in every level of the industry. But it's very important that we know how to transition them from a rank and file to a supervisor, to a manager, and so on. And we've noticed that most of the workers are on the rank and file, but we need to give them the ambition and give them the college education.
Okay, although we just have about 8 minutes to go, if there are any questions from the audience, could you stand up and wave your hand so I can see you? Yes, here, on table 35. I think that's Mr. Ordonez. We do have just 8 minutes to go. So I've introduced you, but let's keep the question short, Mr. Ordonez.
The question is very short. Mr. Sullivan is probably going to be the hope for inclusive growth because he's doing agriculture. Mr. Sullivan, you have said that the farmers should be trained, and yet the extension workers of DA are now with the local governments, and they're not doing the training. What do you think is the solution to this problem?
Well, personally, what we have done in our institution, which is agriculture basically, is that we've taken it upon ourselves to educate communities that, let me speak in terms of just the Typhoon Yolanda communities that we are starting to work with now. is we've taken it upon ourselves basically to set up programs that will educate farmers on some new farming techniques, for example, in the rehabilitation of their coconut farms, for example, in the hopes that it then becomes a demonstration, right, for other communities in the area to see, right, and say, oh, it can work this way. And in the process as well, you obviously do want to bring in let's say the Philippine Coconut Authority, right, to be a participant there, so that they can also take ownership, I suppose, in something like that. But as a private sector, remember the private sector, we have limited ability to disseminate this type of information, on a national level. And obviously coconuts are an important crop for us on a national basis. No? But that's one approach that we are taking in this particular case.
I think I have time for one more question. There's one there at the very back. Please introduce yourself and then please keep the question short.
I'm Joey De La Cruz from the Philippine Commission on Women. I would like to ask regarding the issue of gender aggregation on labor and also in education in order for us to actually move forward for inclusive growth. And what are your prospects regarding the issue, regards to this issue?
Did you want to direct that to one of the specific member of the panel?
I would like to direct it to anyone who can answer the question, rather.
Let's try manufacturing.
Yeah, okay. Sure. I was going to say ladies first, but yeah, I think, and that's a very good point. Women is a very important a contributor to the manufacturing sector. One thing I didn't mention earlier was that one of the features last year of manufacturing is that we're seeing the return of the labor-intensive sectors. We're talking about garments. Garment surpassed $1.5 billion in exports last year. And footwear. There was an announcement of a footwear investment in Subic. We haven't heard that in a long time, no? And who are the perfect workers for garments and footwear? They're women. So certainly a big contribution for their part.
We picked the manufacturing there because, as Eileen pointed out, the problem is reverse in tourism, where it's all women.
Yeah, well, yesterday I was in the Women's Business Council, and I think it's a topic in APEC where the empowerment of women, resiliency, and so on. So I think there's a lot being done right now, not only in the Philippines, but in the global level, of how we need to just have a few more quirks, I guess, for women who, of course, have babies and all of that. And we just have to create a few policies within the workplace that takes care of that.
Before we end, let me ask Roger. I was very interested when you were talking about coalitions. How have you found, aside from the data.gov.ph project, have there been other examples that stand out for you in the Philippines? And what do you think would make Filipinos from the different sectors, government, public, and private, make them feel the urgency to get together and to come up with solutions?
Well, let me dwell a little bit on the data.gov.ph, because this was an initiative which really we saw start and come to fruition in nine months. And many departments had been working on open data, so pretty much every department had an initiative on it, but it sort of was never really coming together, no? And what we saw happening was suddenly the presidency, Department of Budget and Management, private sector, just getting together and saying, listen, we all believe in this principle. A lot of departments might be sort of still polishing their data and they're not yet ready. But if we give this a real concerted effort, we can do this. And it showed to me that it's not the lack of capacity in this country that's lacking at all. If there is this coalition and there is this will, then the group of youngsters actually who put it all together is easily found and can do this. So a lot of the reasons why reforms are stalling is that they're stalling in a way on purpose because they're vested interests, people are not sure. I'll give you a negative example, the sin tax, yeah? So here was a reform where you could find little against it. It saved lives. It brought in much needed revenues. It would level the playing field between the private sector. That took a year of, fighting, and it only passed in the bicameral by 10-9. That, to me, was the example of if you tackle these issues one at a time, you're going to run into such focused lobbying against it that this is not the way to go. This is not how we can look at the 856 days left. There needs to be a much more ambitious reform package. And I think if I see those examples of data.gov.ph, what can be done, I think it's eminently possible.
Okay, unless I get a signal from the backstage, I think we have to end.
Excuse me, can I make a comment?
Hold on, let me ask the backstage if I'm allowed to continue. Okay, without a signal from the backstage, I think it says time is up. I'm very sorry.
Just a comment. It's like this. You have this text here, and
yes.
I have been putting questions already in, actually for the panel, and
yep.
it seems not to reach you.
Yes, I'm afraid it hasn't reached me. But we'll try to get your questions to the panelists and get back to you. Thank you very much. Okay, please join me in thanking our panel this morning.
A big thank you to our speaker, moderator, and panelists. To introduce the next panel, may we call on the President of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines, Mr. Julian Payne.
Good morning, good morning. There's only one worse place to be than the last speaking and panel before lunch when you're all hungry, and that's to be the first one after lunch when you're all full. So we're happy to have this spot in the speaking program. We're all very disappointed that the Chief Justice is ill and will not be able to make her speech today. She's a wonderful speaker and she's a strong supporter of Arrancada. We could send her a bunch of flowers or a box of chocolate, but I think that the best thing to wish her a healthy recovery is frankly a very, very healthy discussion on the rule of law, which we can feed back the conclusions to her. And secondly, I think if we could all give the Chief Justice a big hand for the work she's doing. Let's give the Chief Justice a big hand to get better. My role today is to introduce the panel on strengthening the rule of law. This panel discussion deals with the sections of Part 4 of the Arrancada assessment, which I guess we don't have yet. And the panelists today will be discussing the important sections on governance, on justice, and on education. I would like to invite the panel moderator and panelists to come up to the stage, and I'll briefly introduce you. It will be a very, very brief introduction because their full biographies are included in your pamphlet on Arrancada. As moderator, we have the senior anchor and reporter of ABS-CBN, Mr. David Celdran. Please come up. I will not go into detail in his biography. You can see it in the booklet. As our governance expert today, we have Attorney Simeon Marcelo. Let's invite him up and give him a big hand. Where is he? As our panelist on justice, we have Shariza Nuaza. Where is Ms. Nuaza? Welcome, welcome to the panel. And last but not least, our education expert. We have Dr. Edelberto Daezu. Good governance means a much reduced corruption, which requires enabling laws, adequate resources to investigate, prosecute, and punish offenders. That's one of our key concerns. The judicial sector is reforming but still faces many challenges. And I've noticed that each one of my colleague presidents in making their comments has always digressed slightly. And I wish to digress slightly on the issue of judicial reform. From the Canadian Chamber's point of view, the role of the judiciary is as essential as the role of the legislature and the role of the executive. And from the Canadian Chamber's point of view, a certain number of key issues need to be addressed. The first is objective interpretation of the law and decisions that does not change with changing judges. The second is consistent decisions. If there's no change in the laws, there should be a pattern of consistency. It should not change between now and then. And the third thing is expeditious decision making. Let me give you one example of the second. My dear colleague, the President of the Australia-New Zealand Chamber of Commerce, mentioned mining. If we have a hypothetical situation where there was a decision by a high court that a mining law is constitutional, and then several years later we have another decision where it would be reversed, this has two very profound and serious adverse implications for business. One, it means that business can no longer depend on court decisions of the past as a guide to the future. And this means not just in, say, the mining sector, but it applies more widely. It undermines confidence in the judicial system. The second adverse consequence is that it encourages people to challenge past decisions. So you get the use of TROs and reconsiderations as a business harassment technique. That's my digression. The third sector is, of course, education. Education is the bedrock of our system. It's the bedrock of our society. It's, in fact, the bedrock of business and the bedrock of justice. Better education will guarantee a workforce that's more able to support faster economic growth and better careers for the nation's youth, and thus, as many people have mentioned, better jobs and more jobs. With that, I would like to turn the discussion over to the moderator, and let's have a really healthy discussion on the rule of law for the benefit of our dear Chief Justice, who is unavoidably absent today. Salamat po.
Thank you so much for introducing our panel. And I was going to say good morning, but it's past 12 o'clock, so good afternoon to all of you. It's good to be back at the Arrancada Forum after I missed it last year. And, well, you know, having moderated these fora in the past years, from what seemed like a sense of hopefulness at the very beginning, I'm now starting to sense a bit of impatience in the room, if not a bit of nervousness. And why not? There's only 2 years left in this administration's term, and the point of our discussion really is to pinpoint the priorities that need to be addressed in terms of education, the judiciary, and of course, in the government bureaucracy. But before that, it's interesting that the president himself has made a similar analogy. He's called it the last 2 minutes in a basketball game. And for those of you who are familiar with basketball, and I'm sure most Filipinos are, it's something like being 10 points behind with 2 minutes left in the clock. It's possible to still make it, but of course, very little room for error and absolutely no room for wasting time. And that's a situation we all find ourselves in today. And so that's exactly how I want to start this discussion. And we're going to begin with education, one of the key agendas in the Arrancada Forum. And we have, of course, a former insider in the bureaucracy. He's also a well-known educator. And Dr. De Jesus, I mean, it's very important now to focus on education. 2 years ago, that's not much. Most of the reforms are felt